Can y'all see this? I don't think you can because of the way I have these settings set up on this camera. I want you to see something here real quick. All right, I'm gonna take you for a little ride here real quick. I want you to look at this. Okay, let's take a little gander here. Now I want you to look at this sky. All right, you see that? Look at that. Look how clear that is. Isn't that amazing? Wow. Now if you're thinking to yourself, I don't notice anything out of the ordinary, this looks normal to me, then you're absolutely right. It should look normal. But the problem here is that this sky that you just saw, that is not the norm for me. And I think most of y'all can probably relate with this because the skies here lately, probably just over the last couple of years, have been completely covered in lines that these planes are spraying from the, I don't know, their propulsion systems, the engines or the nozzles or whatever on there. They're spraying stuff in the skies, and the skies here normally do not look like this. This is what skies used to look like back when I was growing up in the 80s and 90s. All the old pictures and stuff I have confirms that. I think my memory confirms that. I think that's a pretty good piece of evidence right there, is just having lived through it. But today, it's wild because skies never look like this. Today, there are no planes doing that in the sky, and that is why the sky looks like this. Because when they're out here spraying and stuff, it's a haze. It starts off with all these weird lines, and then it spreads out, and before you know it, it's just this weird haze that covers everything. You can barely see the sun, and it just feels gloomy and depressing. That's probably the best way to describe it, is just that it's not normal, number one. Number two, it's depressing. But isn't this a very, very sad state of affairs when the highlight of my day is walking outside, looking at the sky and noticing it's normal and feeling like a giddy little schoolgirl because of that? That just really shows how far we have fallen as a civilization. When we walk outside and something that has been normal our entire existence is suddenly presented to us, something that we're not used to seeing, and we get excited about that because we're used to seeing something so dark and depressing that whenever we see something different, it lightens our spirits. It makes us feel very positive and optimistic. And this is not the only thing I've noticed, because there are several other things, and I'll just give you a few examples here. Okay, so I had to go to the DMV not too long ago because I bought a newer vehicle, not a newer vehicle, but I bought a vehicle that's new to me. I downgraded the vehicle I currently have, which is a 2007, and I went down to a 1999 because I'm trying to go back to the simpler stuff, because I don't want to be part of this newer technology where there's, you know, surveillance and all this stuff baked in, and I want something I understand and something that I can work on. So I downgraded my vehicle. But long story short, I went to the DMV and I had to get, you know, new tags and licenses and all that stuff for it. So when I'm in there, I'm never looking at my phone. That is just not something I do when I'm out in public. Most people do that. But what I do when I'm out in public is I look around and I observe. And through doing that, I noticed that there were a handful of people that were just standing there, completely content, without a phone in their hands, without, you know, looking down at a screen. They were just standing there. And in some cases, these people were actually talking to one another. They were communicating face to face. And this made me so doggone excited. I mean, to get excited over something like that is absurd, but I was excited because usually when I go out to restaurants and stuff like that, almost every single person in the restaurant is looking down at their phone. Even if you have a group of people and they're probably all friends or family, most of the time they're not even talking. They're all just looking at their phone. And again, that's a really sad state of affairs when society has kind of gone that way. And something else I noticed through just driving around is here lately, and maybe it's been because, you know, the weather has kind of turned to be a little bit nicer here in Kentucky. It's not as hot as it was. I've been noticing more kids outside playing in the yards, riding bikes. As a matter of fact, the past 2 weekends, I was like, you know what? I've been busy here lately. I've been working around on the farm, doing stuff for YouTube and all that. And I decided that I'm going to take the past 2 Saturdays and I'm going to take my kayak out to the lake and I'm going to fish. just hang out on the lake, just me, alone, in my kayak, in nature, catching some fish. So I did that. And, through kayaking, I passed a couple campgrounds and stuff. And usually those campgrounds are completely full with RVs. I can't tell you how many RVs I've seen over the last probably 10, 15 years compared to tents. It's crazy, because back when I was growing up, it was always just tents. Nobody had RVs back then. But now you can finance that stuff. So everybody, I guess they act like they're millionaires and they run out and buy these, $100,000 RVs. And that's all you see. But at these campgrounds, I saw more tents. As a matter of fact, it was probably about 50-50, and there may have actually been more tents than RVs. And it wasn't just that. I saw more people in kayaks and not motorboats. And I saw kids riding around through the campground on their bikes, literally just doing laps, just enjoying themselves. That's the stuff we used to do when we were kids. I mean, I spent probably 90% of my childhood on my bike. That was what I loved doing, is just riding my bike. I was big into BMX and stuff back then. And seeing that, again, it lifted my spirits. And I'm like, man, it seems like maybe a certain part of society might be kind of reverting back to that older stuff, the older ways of doing things. And something else I noticed just within the last year or so. So I was out in a park, like a community park and stuff, in the middle of a pretty big city in North Carolina. And I pull up there with my dog, and we get out and we're walking around, and it's an on-leash park. And I'm looking around, but there's nobody out there. There are cars in the parking lot, and there are people in those cars, but there is literally nobody else in the park except for me and my dog. And this park is huge. I'm talking, there are trails that go around a lake. There are trails that go through the woods. We walk around for at least an hour and a half. I encounter 2 people on the trails that were way far off in the woods, and that was it. When I get back to the parking lot, all the people that were sitting in their cars were still sitting in their cars, and you know what they were doing? They were looking down at their phones. Some of them were talking on speakerphone because I could hear it through their car speakers. Some of them were texting. Some of them were probably just scrolling. But I was the only one, aside from those couple people I saw, that were actually outdoors enjoying the park. And I'm like, why would you even go to the park if you're just going to sit in the parking lot? But I say all that to say, over the last, I would say 5 to 6 months, I've been noticing more people out in parks. And it gets me really fired up. I get super excited about seeing that, which is really strange because that seems like the normal thing to do. If you go to a park, it doesn't make sense to sit in your car. You'd probably want to get out and enjoy it. And now people are doing that, and I get excited because of it. And I also get very excited when I'm in a new town or a new city I've never visited, and I see a local shop, local business, a family-owned spot. And most of the time, it's a local family-owned spot that sells food, like local food and stuff from local producers. I found one in a town near me, and I walked in there, and I made it a point to buy a half a dozen things in there just because they were selling stuff from local farms and stuff in my area. And I sat in there and talked to them for over an hour. I mean, it was awesome because that's something you don't see anymore. And again, this whole dynamic is completely strange because if you think about even 50, 60 years ago, it was all local shops. It was all small family-owned businesses. But today, they've all been snuffed out. And guess what's moved in? Walmart, Dollar General. All these corporate-owned entities, they've taken over all these small businesses and stuff. So now when I see them, it, just like everything else I'm talking about here, it fires me up. And it makes me really happy that there are people out there still providing for, storefronts for these local businesses and kind of giving them a platform. And I'm here to tell you that I'm getting fired up now about pretty much anything that is natural. Because if you haven't noticed, our natural world is under attack. It's being taken away. We've got all of this technological infrastructure going in, and I'm talking about data centers and, just industry in general. Pretty much, anything that makes products and stuff for us, because people, unfortunately, consume like mad. So there are a lot of industrial, complexes and stuff out there, and that continues to grow. But it's not even about that. It's now that, used to, you could walk down the street and you felt fairly safe. You felt like you had some autonomy and some privacy. But today, with all this surveillance and stuff going in, you don't really feel that way, because even way out here in the middle of nowhere where I live, there are flock cameras going up. And it's not just Flock, you've got Axon and all these other different, surveillance companies that are putting stuff in. So now, anytime that I'm out where there is not that stuff, where I don't see solar farms and stuff that spread for thousands of miles, and I don't see giant factories and warehouses, it makes me really happy. It gets me fired up inside, and it gives me a small sliver of hope, and I feel this overwhelming sense of peace. And in a lot of cases, it makes me feel like I hit the lottery. And I'll give you a prime example of this. All right, this is the last example I'm going to give, because this one was the most profound for me. And this happened last year. So I've been living on this farm since 2009. I've owned this property since I think about 2006. So it's been a long time, about 20 years. And I cannot tell you the last time I saw a monarch butterfly. And I'm old enough to remember the National Geographic shows that used to come on where there were millions of these monarch butterflies that would, they would migrate. And there would be clouds of them in the sky going from, country to country or whatever they did. I remember this stuff when I was a kid. And this was a big thing because monarchs were very common. But like I mentioned, I haven't seen a monarch butterfly out here in as long as I can remember. And last year, I saw one. I walked outside, and my dog actually tried to bite it because she's always chasing stuff that's flying around in the air. She hates birds for some reason. So she runs at this monarch. And she tries to bite it out of the sky, and I screamed at her. I'm like, no, don't do that, Shawnee. No, that's bad. And I run over there, and I'm just like admiring this butterfly. It was as if I hit the lottery. It made my entire day. It made my whole month. It might have even made my whole year. Because, seeing something like that, something that was an integral part of my childhood because I grew up on a farm and they were everywhere, it was the most amazing feeling, and it brought me an overwhelming sense of joy. And while that brought me an overwhelming sense of joy, it's also kind of a nightmare if you really think about it, because that and all of this stuff I just talked about was once normal. But today, that is not normal anymore. And if you remember a couple years ago, they were always saying, the slogan or the whatever you want to call it, the big narrative was the new normal. Like, we have to accept this because this is the new normal. How many times did you hear that? I heard it pretty much every single day. And looking back on that, I'm like, I wonder if they were kind of preparing us for this. Maybe that was some kind of programming. Because this reality that we're living in now, where there are lines in the sky, where no one communicates, where everybody's on their phone, where certain bugs and animals and creatures and stuff that we saw throughout our childhood no longer exist, where all these things have changed and shifted, that has now been normalized. That is the new normal. And the old world that we remember, that doesn't even seem like it exists anymore, that is somehow not normal. So I often ask myself, was all of that new normal talk, all those slogans and stuff that we heard, was that just some kind of predictive programming to prepare us for this dystopia that we seem to be headed towards? And the more I think about this, the more it relates to that movie Elysium, if you've ever seen that with Matt Damon. I think about that movie all the time because they had those weird cyborg like robots and stuff in that movie, which seems to be the things that are kind of coming. They had those suits, the cyborg suits, where people kind of integrated themselves with technology. And if I remember right, I think they even had chips and stuff that were in the back of their head, their minds, that kind of helped them control their thoughts and maybe boosted the human performance. And doesn't that sound kind of very in line with what's happening right now? We have cyborg robots that are coming out. I think there's supposed to be like 30 million within the next couple years. We have the Neuralink, the chip that's supposed to go in our brain that's supposed to help us keep up with AI. We have all of this concrete and all of this infrastructure and these utopias, these 15-minute cities and stuff that are supposed to be utopias that are being built. It all sounds like Elysium. So is that where we're headed? Is that the new normal? And is all this stuff from our past just going to be that? Our past? We'll never see that stuff again? I honestly don't know the answer to that, but I will say that the shift that I've been seeing, where some of these things from our past are coming back, I think that is a sign. I think it's a sign that this dystopia and the future that we're headed towards, the entire narrative around that is starting to fracture. I think people are starting to see the direction we're headed, and they're realizing that it is in our human nature not to align with that, because throughout our entire existence, that has not been our reality. So people are pushing back. And I think people are either consciously or maybe even subconsciously bringing this old stuff back into our lives, because that is the stuff that aligns with us as a species. It is not the concrete. It is not the technology. It is not, getting rid of the natural world. It is not keeping our faces stuck in our phones and not talking to one another face to face. It is not having human interaction. None of that stuff is natural to us as a human race. And I'm going to continue to get fired up and excited about seeing people outside. I'm going to continue to get excited about seeing kids playing in the yard and seeing butterflies fly around on my farm. And all these things from our past that are now not only being neglected, but they've kind of been forgotten. They've kind of been snuffed out. And I am personally going to continue to make it a point to adopt more of these things into my life and live a life that is more in alignment with that kind of stuff, because that is what aligns with me. And I'm sure that's not going to be what aligns with everybody. Maybe some people like this technology. Maybe some people like the AI. Maybe some people like the concrete. And don't get me wrong, these things do have their place. AI and technology and computers and the internet and all this stuff, even social media, it all has a place. It can be a very useful and powerful tool if it's used properly. But that's the question. Is it going to be used properly? When it comes to surveillance, that's going to be used to fight crime, or is supposed to be used to fight crime. But is that actually what it's being used for? Or is there the potential for it to be used for things that are much more nefarious? Is there potential for it to be used to control the general population? And maybe that's the part of the narrative that people are seeing, and that's the reason things are starting to fracture, because people are seeing that these things can be a powerful tool. They can be a complement to our lives, but they're not being used in that way. And maybe that is the thing that is uniting people. Maybe that's the thing that's waking people up. And maybe that's the thing that is going to unravel this dystopia that we seem to be headed towards. And if it is, maybe we still have a fighting chance at creating a future that's a little more bright and a lot less dystopian.